Welcome to the Varside Spurs Pubcast, coming to you all the way from the Varside Arms. Today, I'm joined by our very own Howard Carter. That is Professor Ritch Grove. How are you, my friend?
I'm all right, Lee. More importantly, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Although maybe not tomorrow. Obviously, I'm a chap of a certain age who's had a few health problems, and tomorrow's not really going to do me many favors, I wouldn't have thought.
No, it's gonna put the old stents to the test, isn't it?
Oh yeah, they're going to get a proper workout tomorrow, but I'll take that if we win.
Yeah, well, this is what we're all here for, isn't it?
Yeah,
The misery and the misery and the hope.
it's strange, isn't it? Really, though, because the misery gives you more joy when you do when it does go right. It's like we don't
get enough of.
Go on, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say we certainly get enough of that, don't we? I mean, it's not as if we're spoilt by success, is it?
No. Anyway, so should we talk about actually one of our biggest successes? Gareth Bale announced he retired from professional football, which was a bit of a surprise because I think he's had to buy himself out of his contract. So just kind of kick off really with your favourite memories of the master, probably the best British footballer ever, maybe. Could be considered up there anyway. Tough one.
It's toughy, isn't it? Because
there's so many.
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's a long time ago as well. I mean, you sort of think it actually only feels like yesterday until you actually sort of call it to mind, and then
about a decade or more ago, isn't it?
It's 10 years since he went. Well, 11 years, I think. So, I mean, I was a young man and everything when he played for Spurs. It's one of my deep regrets. I don't want to sort of go too far into it at the moment, but I think I've spoken about this on other pods, but I didn't actually ever get to see Bale play live ever. Because back in the days when he came through, I was having a little personal protest with the club, and it had ran for a few years. I was so incensed with how Levy got rid of Martin Jol back in 2008 that I vowed that I wasn't going to spend any more money with the club until I heard him bloody apologise for it. And so I'd stayed away for years. I mean, I'd gone from 20. My first game was in 1987. The first time I actually went to see him. And I'd gone from going reasonably regularly from that time right the way up till when they got rid of Jol. And I said, that's it. Until I hear an apology for the way he behaved, I ain't spending another penny with the club. And of course, that coincided with Bale's time at Spurs. So, I mean, I went back just before Pochettino was appointed because I'd read an article by Jol that he'd done an interview with Dan Kilpatrick when he was still just a podcaster before he was the big sort of Evening Standard journalist that he is now. And he'd said that in this interview, Jol had said that Levy had really looked after him and that it had been reported badly and so on. And at that point, I went back. But during the time Bale was there, I didn't ever go to Spurs, so I only ever got to watch him on the telly. And I think it's called, a prime example of cutting your own nose off to spite your face, isn't it? In retrospect, because of my bloody ethics or whatever you might call them.
Principles, mate. You're principled man.
My principles, I missed out on watching possibly the most talented footballer we've ever had at the club.
Yeah. Well, we'll actually probably retouch on that ground about a certain Mr. Levy and ENIC a bit later on. Actually. So there's a lot seems to be going on at the moment, but you do you even just watch it on the TV? Do you think you've got a favourite memory or there's just too many?
Yeah, I mean it's the Milan game at home for me. The Inter game, and it sort of wrapped up with a load of personal stuff. My first marriage had just broken up at the time, and I was a bit sort of miserable, and I had the elongated face for quite a long time, and the day of that game, my ex-wife had been round to get the last of her stuff from the boat that we lived on, and I remember going home that evening thinking, God, am I going to have a telly? Am I going to have, is she going to have taken all of the nice tea towels? You know how it goes. And I got in, and actually she hadn't really taken an awful lot, and so I was a bit sort of buoyed by that, and she'd left the TV, which I was really surprised about. And it happened that I was more just because I put the boat next to a road so that she could get stuff to the car easily. And it happened that I could get a TV signal there, and anybody that sort of moves about, will know that you can't always watch the telly, especially if you live on a boat, And so the TV worked, and back in them days, you could still watch the Champions League on terrestrial telly, And I thought, well, I've had a bit of a let off. Spurs can destroy my mood for what's left of the evening. And I put the TV on expecting us to get absolutely trounced. And then, of course, that was the sort of taxi for Mycon game.
Yeah.
And really, so it sort of wrapped up in all of that kind of everything started to go right for me from that day onwards. And it turned out that relationship breaking down and all that stuff that had gone on was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it all became apparent from that day. And that game was really the starting point of probably the best 12 months I ever had.
All because of Gareth Bale, eh?
And it all started with Gareth Bale, So, that's kind of, I'm not really much of I'm not a stats man, and I'm not a details man when it comes to watching football, but that's how sort of the football sort of intertwines with your life,
Yeah.
Watching that game back, will always sort of trigger all of that for me.
You can't unpick it from our lives. It's so important to our lives that it's possibly for most of us, it's the first thing we think of and the last thing we think of every day. And throughout the day, you're just constantly thinking about the club, about certain things, even though, it becomes an obsession, doesn't it? So, yeah. I mean, I look back and there are so many. I mean, that game you mentioned was really kind of where he announced himself, wasn't it, to the world? So it's sort of iconic in, obviously we got this sort of cliched taxi from Icon, but the world then just stood, sat up and went, actually this lad is something special. And it began that that journey for him. For me, I live in prime West Ham territory, so as much as I do hate a lot of the other London clubs, obviously particularly we were talking about Arsenal later on, but the grief I get from West Ham fans. So for me, the goal where he beat about 8 West Ham players and then got fouled, knocked over, got up, picked the ball up and right, I'm having this, and then just like walloped it in from about sort of 5-10 yards outside the penalty area, outside the box. It was just that was phenomenal. That was just a genius goal. Yeah. I mean, we forget how lucky we were to watch him, don't we? I mean, we were called the one-man team with Bale. We've had that over the years, haven't we, with Kane and etc. But to be fair, we pretty much were, weren't we?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I had a sister-in-law at the time. Sort of going forwards from that into the last year of him being there, who's a big Liverpool fan, and she always used to say to me, "We know we're going to beat you because we just put 3 people on Bale and that's it." And unfortunately, she was fucking right more often than she was wrong.
But he was that sort of player that everyone ended up trying it, but he could just get away from it. I tell you, the player that reminds me of the way that he just kind of rolls them and gets past them is Kulusevski at the moment. And they're not the same players, but there's just something about the way that he plays the game that just kind of reminds me that almost like anything could happen when he gets the ball. Yeah. I mean, I think that the massive difference between the two, isn't there? That Kulusevski relies an awful lot on his upper body strength. I mean, he's a big lad, whereas with Bale, it was just, I think what would happen was he was there 1 minute and the fella would look round and he was 15 yards further up the pitch half a second later. And, it was sort of,
if you see the player cam on the guys that he was beating, all you could see was them sort of looking around to see where he'd gone. So, but yeah, I mean, a phenomenal player. And I also think, you know, we should give some sort of credence to that second spell that he had with us. I know that, you know, you do come across a lot of people that say, well, he didn't really do it. And, you know, he was only there to get
I think he scored about 16 goals. And considering it took a long while to get into the team because that fucking prick of a manager.
It just left him on the bench all the time. Yeah. I think it was 14 goals he scored that season. And you know, without that input, I mean, we would have been nowhere really, would we?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you know the majority of them turned out to be important goals. You know, often because he'd, like you say, come on as a sub or because they were late in the latter half of the season. And I think it's a real shame that you know that he didn't get a run out in the cup final. For whatever reason, Ryan Mason didn't. I don't know how he approached that game, you know, and that was a really, really missed opportunity because I think he was in the form to have caused City some problems in that League Cup final, and it would have been beautiful for that to have been his last, you know,
I don't know, maybe
lasting memory.
Mourinho a disservice, but I just always felt that Mourinho wanted to be the biggest show in town, and that's why Bale didn't really get enough of a chance.
Yeah, I think this is probably it, isn't it?
Anyway, talking about retirees, we got Lloris as well, who retired from France, but God, I don't know. You know, he's just prone at the moment to let one slip under him or knock one out, and he's got a lot of errors in his game at the moment. And I know we're thinking of replacing him, but you know, a few people have talked about would we even play Forster tomorrow instead of him? I'm not sure, but no.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I know it was his first match for a long time, but that League Cup game against Forest, he was a fucking calamity in himself, wasn't he? I mean, I know he is supposed to be, you know, a decent keeper still, and that, you know, he may not be spectacular, but you know, he is a safe pair of hands and a very experienced goalkeeper, and perhaps that will come with game time, but. Even with Lloris's you know, well documented ability to fucking chuck one in when nobody's looking, I think tomorrow might be one of those games where actually his you know, he is capable still of pulling off decent snap saves, you know, when the shots come in at high speed or from the edge of the box and that. And I know he doesn't always do it, and he is prone. I think that might actually be useful tomorrow because I think they're going to pepper us, aren't they?
Yeah. He's a good, reaction keeper. So I mean, I'll out Andy here because I said to him, "Would you rather Forster tomorrow than Lloris?" He said he'd rather Jodie Forster than Lloris.
Yeah.
So no, but I to be honest, it's marginal, but I'd still go with Lloris.
I would. I mean, you know, I think with everything in football these days is that there's a modicum of truth in all of this, but the narrative does get taken over by the hyperbole that tends to come from online discourse. And I think Lloris is guilty of that. And that's not to say, he's not guilty of it. He's a victim of it. That's not to say that he isn't error prone and that he isn't getting worse. But I do think some of it is a little bit over-talked.
Yeah, I agree. Know. So before we get onto the North London derby, there seems to be a little bit of noise on Twitter about ENIC and the transfer window. What's your take on it all, Ritch? Where to start?
Go again. Yeah. It's this sort of biannual or you know, sort of twice yearly fucking circus has come back to town, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. For my own sanity, I consciously disengage from the whole fucking thing. You know, I try not to get involved in it. I mean, I've had my issues with ENIC over the years. Strangely enough, I'm often accused of being a happy clapper, despite the fact that I had a self-imposed 8-year exile from the club because of them. You know, I mean, happy clapper. Yeah.
The problem is, I suppose, with that particular vim and very loud fan base is that I've heard a lot of people talk about it that quite got decent platforms, and the way that people have come at them afterwards is that if you try and be reasonable about it, there is no reason. It's either you're with us or you're against us, and I think that's not helpful. I think that the problem here is quite multi-layered, and it's not exactly binary, really. I mean, it's you got to understand that what they've done for the club is incredible, but of course you can see why people, I mean, I know, really thought, intelligent people, I do know a few intelligent people that actually do want ENIC to go, but they don't tend to say it on Twitter because you get the wrong kind of impression, because there are a lot of people that are very toxic with it and very you've got this sort of anti-Semitic trope that I think is, which can be problematic and doesn't add to any credence to this argument about whether you think they've taken us as far as they can. And maybe there is something to that, but I mean, I'm not fussed either way. I mean, I put it on record before that we do need investment. We do need to take this club forward. Otherwise, what was this all for? But I'm neither ENIC in nor ENIC out. I'm sort of, maybe ambivalent is the wrong word, but if he gets success and he does he does it the right way, then well done to him. His strategy's been fantastic, and he's done the right job. I don't want him to go just for the sake of saying, fulfilling an agenda. But if it is time, then it's time, and he will know that, and he's not going to go because fans are screaming at him and calling him, a penny pincher and all this kind of problematic sort of language. But I suppose in some ways, the delay in buying people at the moment in the window just throws further fuel on the fire. I mean, we do need investment. If nothing happens this window, okay, maybe strategically it is something that they've thought of and Conte's happy with, but it's really going to lead to a very unsettled fan base because they're going to see it as a lack of ambition. And to be fair, they might be right. And also, where does that leave us with our manager? Because we are in a difficult position, because clearly he's made the noises that he wants to see what our ambition is. He wants to see our hand first before he commits. So it is a difficult one. It's not as straightforward as get rid and everything will be okay, because that in itself requires a lot of change, a lot of overhaul. It's just not going to be a one in, one out, and all of a sudden it's totally different.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to come back on in that, isn't there? And if you will, sort of let me sort of pick them apart a little bit. There's a couple of concurrent issues, aren't there? I mean, my own opinion is that I remember very well what the club was like when he came in. I remember. I mean, we don't want to sort of go over that now, but the years of the post-Scholar years and Sugar, and how toxic it was at Spurs and how fucking useless it was at Spurs that decade.
And we nearly went bust at one point.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, we nearly came to the wall a couple of times. I remember. I've got a memory. I remember Status Quo in the early 90s announced that they were willing to do a fundraising gig at White Hart Lane to try and pay our tax bill or whatever it was that we were in the dock for at the time.
God love them.
I mean, it was. People forget how bad it was, and that's not to say that we should sort of use that as an excuse, but. I mean, Sugar came along and did what he did, and I'm not his biggest fan by any means, but in certain respects, he did stabilise the club as a business. Of course, ENIC came in, and we were firmly, sort of 12th, 14th, top 10 was a good finish, and I remember, you've got to think that they have put all these billions of pounds into the club over the years and redeveloped all this stuff, and it all takes time and it all takes a lot of money, and they've had to do it in the context of not having some of the revenue that our rivals perceived rivals, let's say Arsenal down the road. I mean, all of that transformation happened during the time when, Wenger was winning pots after pots after pots, and Woolwich were consistently at the top of the league. And, and we saw, their dip in fortunes after they moved into their new stadium and they had to refinance everything. And of course, they're still perhaps now only climbing out of that hole finally, 12, 14 years after they moved into Ashburton Grove. So, I mean, that has to be sort of set aside as the context for everything they've done. And although I think that they could have done things very differently, I do see the positive side of what they have done for the club. And I don't particularly buy into this narrative that, well, Levy lucked out when he got Pochettino and he didn't expect that success and all these things happened kind of by accident, because whether or not that was the appointment that he thought it was going to be, it's not like he hadn't been trying to sort of roll the managerial dice to move the football inside on. And they have spent money. They've not spent it particularly well, but they have spent a lot of money on players over the years. Perhaps the biggest fault is that they haven't had a decent recruitment policy. And so, it is, whether or not it's come to the end of time, I do look around at who it is that we seem to be linked with. I mean, the latest thing is Qataris, and, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Hedge fund managers are the other, tend to be the other source of huge amounts of wealth that we can tap into. And I really, the whole thing leaves me a bit uneasy. So, from my own perspective, I think now is the time. This is the point at which they have to do this. Right, we're going to invest. Yeah. They've got last summer, they did sort of make a bit of a start at it. And then they've got this month and possibly this summer coming. But both Kane and Conte will probably go if we don't make progress in the meantime. And that does look a little bit fragile at the moment. It's not helped by the fact that we play turgid football, but we knew we were going to get that with Conte because that's his game. I don't really know. I mean, I guess the whole thing about the managerial fragility is polarized by the fact that Pochettino appears to be sitting at home twiddling his thumbs. And, there's that narrative about the inevitability of him coming back, and as much as I would love to see him come back to the club, I think you have to solve that inherent issue that was his downfall, which is the same thing as Conte's facing, which is the recruitment thing. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Paratici is the one that will solve it. I'm yet to be convinced, but, as much as I try and remain separate from the transfer circus, we're being linked with a couple of players that might do the jobs, and Porro's the obvious one. Although it is interesting to see that the latest talk of him coming back is tied in with the return of Marcus Edwards, who we all knew that we'd end up buying back for a load of money after we let him go for nothing. I'm sure Chris Miller, of all people, I've not checked on what he's been saying recently, but I expect he's, rolling his eyes at the whole thing.
Not the only club to do that, though, are they? I mean, lots of clubs have made that mistake.
Yeah, well, quite, yeah. But I mean, it is bad. I mean, the thing that really I don't like. I was at the FA Cup game last week, and where we were sat in the southeast corner, there was a lot of really nasty ENIC out. Only a clutch of people, but they were singing songs about Levy's going to die, and the only thing that's left to be decided is out, and all that. And I just think, lads. And this is, you sort of look around, and this is fathers with young sons as well, and there were kids around, and I sort of think, well, there is people have got a right to voice their opinions, but try not to be an arsehole about it.
Exactly, and sometimes you just don't know who will take over and what they'll be like. I mean, they could have enough. Like the talk is that Joe Lewis has had enough, and after 23 years, and he's pushing to sell the club. Perhaps that might be on the agenda, but there's no guarantee we're going to get this fantasy philanthropist who's willing just to spunk a whole load of cash to make us into world beaters. We could end up with someone again like just an investment company. And the thing is that I'm not sure what people's issue is with them being an investment company if they've done what they've done for us. They are a business after all. They came in, okay, they bought the club for 20 million or something like that, and they might sell it for 4 billion. But They've given us a new stadium, new training facilities. They've taken us from mediocrity, where we never even thought that we would be, to fairly regular Champions League contenders. And if now is the right time to pass us on because they maximize what they can do with us, then fair enough. And I say thank you for them, and we'll move on to something else. But there's no guarantee who they sell us to isn't going to be someone else who also is looking to get a return on the money. There aren't many nation states that have taken over clubs so we can play fantasy football. There's a few in the world, but most have got people who are pretty pragmatic and still have to turn over a profit themselves. So that's not just being pocketing and trousering all the money. That's business. And and if you don't do that, we could very easily be someone like Leeds, who end up going down the leagues and being in the doldrums, and if it isn't for sound financial sense.
Yeah, well, this is entirely the thing, isn't it? For every Sheikh Mansour, there is a Sisu or a Venkis. There is. And I know, we're talking about clubs that don't have the profile of Tottenham, but you've only got to look what bad investment and bad ownership have done to clubs like Coventry. It took Leeds a long time to climb out of their hole. There were a lot of clubs in the bottom half of the Premier League and the Championship and League One, and that are in perilous financial straits. And they are really built on houses of cards, based purely on bad decisions by owners. And you have to wonder, like you say, who it is that's going to come in and what they're going to do. This whole idea that there is any kind of functional due diligence in existence for things like football club ownership is fucking laughable. And I think that is the thing. And I always say, and I know that it's something that I've had people really go at me for saying this, but what is it? We've been in 6 cup finals that we've lost in the last 10 years. If we'd have won 4 out of those 6, we'd have a happy fan base, because literally the only thing people are complaining about is not having any silverware.
Yeah. And it's driven by, I suppose, that sort of opposition, ridicule and mocking that Tottenham have never won any silverware. I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, the history of our club, it is pretty glorious in the past. And okay, we do need to start winning things, which is maybe why people don't now want to go back to a project manager, because they want to start winning now. But everything now is an echo chamber, or of that, and that mocking, and I think the number of fans, particularly the young, sort of younger fans, are very vocal about feeling that humiliation that they're associated to a club that don't win anything. It's like that is in our DNA, but it's not in our DNA. At some time, it will change. Everything goes in cycles.
Of course it does. Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I guess the catch for it all is that other clubs that have gone through that cyclical process, the clubs like United and Arsenal that have gone from being routinely successful to only periodically successful, have still managed to pick up a cup here and there, and I guess that's where the argument runs into some sort of difficulty as a justification for staying as we are. But I think you have to look at every managerial appointment and every team cycle as an episodic thing in itself. We cannot, we cannot say it is 20 years and it is this and there's only one trophy and all that time and so on. You think, how many teams, how many managers, how many times have we had to start again because the fans have demanded it, because they've demanded that we didn't stick with, I mean, you think that, the last guy to lift a cup with us, one day Ramos, was out of a job 6 months later. And yes, the football was bad. And yes, there'd been some terrible transfer decisions, and we lost Berbatov and Keane, and all those players went out from under him, and what might have happened if that hadn't have happened. But those were things that were largely out of the club's control. Berbatov essentially did a runner,
Look at Chelsea now. They spent 400 million, and they're 10th. And Potter's been in charge for 4 months, and their fan base want him sacked already.
I mean, I know
there's no patience in football.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Andy can't wait to have him get the sack and be appointed at Spurs, can he?
So, he wants to do a part exchange, doesn't he? He wants Conte to go there, and we'll have Potter.
We'll have
to be fair, that might even be a decent arrangement, but
yeah. I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, there is no answer.
Redknapp used to say, "It's difficult."
It's difficult, son. Yeah, just if the players do a little bit more of Redknapp's just fucking running around a bit, maybe things will get better.
Yeah, right. Should we jump straight ahead to that absolutely horrendous, excruciating day tomorrow, then, and look at the North London derby? What are you feeling about it?
I don't really know what to think at the moment. It depends which Tottenham turns up. I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. If, as I've believed all the way through, that this first half containment, second half play football is a policy to try and maintain the legs of the first 15 for the season, then tomorrow might be the proving of that, because I suspect that if that is the case, it might be the one occasion where he tells us to take the handbrake off from the first minute.
Mm-hmm.
If we try and contain them till half time, we're going to go in 3-0 down.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we need to actually go at them. And then if we get a goal ahead, then I think we can then start playing on the counter, and because they're going to have to then come at us. This is a big game for them. I think if we sit back and hope to soak it up, our defense isn't good enough. They'll undo us.
They will. They really will. I mean, their tails are up. They do play some nice football, I have to admit, as much as it pains me to admit it. This is the unfortunately, the very painful demonstration of not only sticking with your project manager, but backing him when he asks for it.
Yeah.
It's coming to fruition. I just hope that their fragility is exposed, because I do think we've got it. I mean, Newcastle showed the other week that if you do step up to them, you can stop them.
Yeah.
And so they're not the bogeyman. They are still a team that is still in development, and I suspect they are further forward than they expected themselves to be. Yeah. Certainly where, the intelligent and reasonable Arsenal fans that I know didn't expect them to be where they are this season. And certainly not as far forward as they are. So there's something in it for us to go at them. I mean, it's it's encouraging that we'll hopefully have Kulusevski back, who, going back to what you said at the start of the pod, that we're often accused of being a one-man team, and that does get thrown at us with Harry Kane a lot. And I genuinely believe that we are the one man whose team we are is Kulusevski this year, because without him we are toothless.
Yeah. To be fair, I think if we had all our team there, like if we had everyone fit, I think we're a good match for them. I don't think they've got a better squad than or team overall than us, and I know that seems illogical compared, looking at where they are. They've had a few fortunate results, and like you said, I think they have played well. You can't, you got to take your hat. I wish we were playing that football, but they, and a lot of the younger players are stepping up. Xhaka actually looks like a completely different player. But if we had everyone fit, we are a match for any team in the league, I think. And I think that I'm hoping really tomorrow Bentancur passes the test today, because I think we do need him. I think he's he has grown into that player that I thought we've lacked for a long time, that sort of metronomic player that everything goes through, and he just keeps it simple and makes it happen. I think he also is very, very important to the way we play. So if we were to have him and Kulusevski, I think we have a great chance, and then it will just come down to mentality. Who's got the mentality on the day, who can keep their calm, who, which manager transmits the most panic to their players, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Conte's got a reasonable record against them, hasn't he? So I think he's it's not as if we're going to somewhere like Old Trafford, where I don't think he's ever won as a manager. I might be wrong on that, but he should be going into it calm. He should be going into it with a clear plan that is communicated well. We've had a bit of time. We've got these players coming back. Richarlison's also hinting on his social media feed that he might be ready to be included. I mean, if we can have somebody like him to come off the bench, especially if we're going to see another turgid Sun performance, you know, I mean, I know he's recently at least found the back of the net again, but you know, we're still seeing a shadow of his former self. That we have
tomorrow might be the game for him. You know, I think tomorrow might just bring the best out in Son.
Well, I'd hope so. I mean, certainly Arsenal are not going to be a team that are going to come and put 11 people behind the ball, and that I think has been. His downfall has been that people have been packing players around him in defence, and so he's not had space to run into, which is his strength. So, you know, with a bit more of an open field around him, with a team like Arsenal who are going to want to come at us from their own perspective rather than just hit us on the break, then I think that is a possibility. And if not, and if Richarlison is fit, then I think Conte needs to show a little bit of sort of Pochettino's famous kahunas and whip him off and put Richarlison on to really put the frighteners on him, because I think they won't know what to fucking do with him.
No, exactly, and it'll be you know, if we can even have those two on the bench, I think that would be that would put the cat amongst the pigeons for them as well. I mean, I've been blocking it out of my mind, but on tomorrow I'll be shitting my pants. I hate the games. You know, they're just there's like. You know, I think someone called it once going to the dentist twice a year. I can't remember who it was now, but it's like that. I know it's horrible, but if we, you know, I don't know. Should we go for predictions?
Well, I do. I mean, I'm going to be the eternal optimist because that's what I am. I do think we are going to beat them. I think it's going to be a fucking horrible game. I think they're going to be all over us. I think they're going to show up all of our weaknesses, and I think we're going to beat them 2-1.
Do you know what? That's exactly what I was going to say, 2-1. So I'm going to stick with it as well. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, that'll give the lads that do the midweek pod something to laugh at us about after we get fucking trounced. But exactly. You've got to go into these things expecting that, haven't you? Like you say, there's no reason why we can't beat them. They haven't had a really, really, really good test. Newcastle stood toe-to-toe with them the other week and stopped them in their tracks. And I think we can do one better.
Listen, we will have a really good go at him, and Kane has got a lot to prove tomorrow because he's obviously on that record that he can get, and it'll be perfect to do it against them.
Wouldn't it?
The fans will be absolutely. This will be the most electric game. I'm looking forward to being there for the atmosphere. It's a nervy one.
It is. Did you just on a very quick final note? Did you see? Paul Merson, the world galaxy brain that he is, has said that if we lose tomorrow, Kane will leave. So there you go.
He's a moron. And on that bombshell, in the Barside Spurs podcast, Coys.
Come on, you Spurs.